My name is Jessica, and I will be facilitating this session. And Miguel is in the back, so if you guys need anything, please feel free to ask. Just a few announcements. The exhibit hall is open until noon today. Please join us for Peter Gerhardt's closing keynote at 4:30 in the President's Hall. Remember, in order to get continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in a verification form at the registration desk prior to departing on your last day of attendance. This is where you will put the codes given at the end of each presentation. You can access the PowerPoint and any handouts for this session via the conference website or Groupio app. We are also asking that upon the completion of each presentation that you give us feedback for that session via the new Groupio mobile app. And we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Wayne Pugh. Now I know I was going to mess it up.
Fuquay.
Fuquay. All right.
Yes, Dr. F. That's okay.
So let's give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you.
We're going to get started.
Thank you, Jess. I apologize for my last name. It's interesting when I go to a restaurant and they call my reservation, I listen for a reservation for Mr. F. I go, hey, stop, that's me. You can imagine it becomes obscene very quickly, so I try to save people from that embarrassment, okay? And you are very welcome to call me Wayne. I'm not a very formal person by any means, okay? Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you may have been asked to do is to sign a release to be involved in the live streaming, and I wanted to tell you why that was and to also assure you about, I think you're safe to do it unless is anybody here in witness protection plan or anything like that, so you can't be showing up, or, okay. Anybody tell your spouse you're off doing something nefarious and really you're at an ethics presentation, you don't want to bust you or anything like that, okay? So the reason it's there is because part of what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to do some interactive things. The basic idea of a workshop is work. You actually do something. You know, LeBron James didn't learn to be a fantastic basketball player by reading about basketball or by having someone tell him about basketball. It's a matter oftentimes of practice. And one of the things that will be a theme of this workshop, after some introductory remarks, fairly quickly, I'm going to divide you up into some teams and say, okay, here are some ethical scenarios that you might encounter. And I'm going to have your team put together a discussion of it, identify what the factors are that may be relevant, and most importantly, I'm going to have you do a role-play demonstration of how you might confront and resolve that ethical issue. So you will get to be the star on this far more than I will be in many ways, okay? This is not a test of acting skills, by the way. It's not a test of how well you know the code. It's really an issue of can you do problem solving in a tactful and appropriate and effective fashion. And one of the reasons we'll do that is because I've got some role plays that are kind of prepared, but I'm also going to invite you as team members to identify other ethical challenges that might be more relevant or more challenging than some of the ones that I have. But let me give you first of all kind of the overview and scenario. And thank you for tolerating my taste in music, a little Eagles and Coldplay. Oftentimes I'll play some music before a class. There's not a really good behavior analysis music repertoire out there. No one's done anything called the undifferentiated functional analysis blues or anything like that, or all I want for Christmas is a gift that doesn't violate the BACB Code of Ethics or something along those lines. We need some good music that's appropriate for behavior analysis, I think. But anyhow, that's beside the point. By the way, I also understand that this is also being live streamed. This is the first time I've done this workshop with a live streaming connection, essentially. So I'm hoping it comes across well for the live stream folks. One of the things that'll be a little bit of a challenge for the people doing the live stream is when we get to doing some of the team activities, if you're doing the live stream with a group of people, you might try to simulate or replicate that activity in your group setting, because that's once again part of the valuable part of the workshop is some of the group activities and the interaction. So I'm hoping that it works okay for everybody with respect to live streaming. Okay, I told Jess you didn't have to do a lengthy introduction because I was going to say something briefly about myself so you know where I'm coming from and what background I have. Hopefully it'll be helpful a little bit. I'm a professor, have been a professor for a long time at Western Michigan University. I teach in the behavior analysis and clinical psychology program. I was chair of that department for 14 years, so you can imagine the interesting ethical issues that I came in contact in both of those roles, especially in the chair role. And for those who don't know, Western is considered a leading training center in behavior analysis, internationally recognized. So, on top of that, I've been one of the few people that I know of in behavior analysis to actually have some grant funding out of the National Science Foundation to do some work, mostly in research ethics. How do you disseminate research ethics throughout a university, and how do you understand ethical decision making as you get exposed to ethical challenges in the research process? So I've had a couple of grants along those lines. I've also had up here, and I have listed near misses with some interesting ethical issues. And it really sensitized me to the importance of ethics training. Shortly after I got to Western, I was a new faculty member. It was quite a while ago. I got a call from a federal investigator saying, we're investigating some research that you're an author on. And I went, oh my gosh. I probably said something other than, oh my gosh, but you can imagine what I probably said. So, but it turned out that what they were doing is they were investigating not me, but they were investigating another person. And I can mention, most of the time I'm really respectful of confidentiality, but this was very public. So I can mention the name, it's been in the news and stuff like that. And it was actually one of the early cases that led to the formation of the Office of Research Integrity. The man's name was a psychologist, a behavior analyst actually, called Steve Bruning. And he was doing work with people with developmental disabilities in a place called Coldwater, Michigan, and was doing all kind of fantastic publications about the effects of drugs, in particular stimulants on problem behavior. However, it turned out that he was making up all of the data. He was just sitting down at night and making it up, essentially, and he was collaborating with some other people who were kind of coming up with the ideas, helping write the manuscripts. And some of these people, by the way, were people I knew. They were colleagues at Western, and I happened to have a publication where he was the third author. It turned out, of all the publications he had, the one that I was on, which was really the dissertation for one of my doctoral students, was the one that was found to be completely valid and legitimate. I went, whew. Thank goodness. But it also made me realize how vulnerable we are to being deceived by an unethical colleague, or maybe we just don't see something that's really an ethical issue that we need to be concerned with. So it really got me very sensitized to that, especially as I saw the pain and difficulty it caused for my colleagues who were naive as to what was going on and didn't realize that this person was not really upholding high ethical standards as it pertained to research. So that sensitized me to that. And then there was another one which was not quite as difficult really in some ways, but more recently I was involved in a fairly large grant to take kind of, let's call it simulation training into the hospital setting to help people prevent medical errors. Because for those of you who don't know, the estimates, conservative estimates are about 90,000 people a year die of medical error in the United States. And that's about like a 727 crashing every single day of the year for the entire year. That's a lot of people. And most of those are preventable medical errors that result from poor communication or something along those lines. So we were using simulation strategies in there. It was all working well. The guy that was the PI was a pilot with United Airlines, and one of the things I mentioned that because if you're an airline pilot, you got to do all the simulation training and demonstrate you can fly a plane before they put you in there with a plane with 250 people on it, obviously. He also said he had a medical degree from the University of Wisconsin, which turned out to be fallacious. He did not have a medical degree. So it was still fairly interesting work, but it was, once again, a credential that was simply not there. So once again, that kind of sensitized me to that. So I won't go into much detail on that. We aren't going to talk about those in great detail, but that's how I got interested in the topic. I've been teaching courses in ethics at Western Michigan, graduate courses for quite a long time, also workshops. Some of the workshops, a variation on this one that I've done, I developed with John Bailey. Some of you know who John Bailey is from the book that he's written. Been on the Michigan Autism Council. I was an initial member of the Michigan Autism Council, setting policy in the state of Michigan. I do a lot of consulting on autism service delivery, including reviews of some treatment plans that go into insurance companies, making sure the quality is there, making sure there's no fraud or anything of that nature. So I have a good bit of experience, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the WMU Autism Center of Excellence. And in that Autism Center of Excellence, we have a number of training videos that, if some of you haven't seen, I would recommend them. And they include like interviews with Brian Awada on how to do a functional analysis, interviews with Tim Vollmer about differential reinforcement, Willie DeLeon on preference assessment. So there's a lot of good resources out there. So anyhow, that's how I got involved in this particular area. But I don't know everything. Okay, so one of the things I want to emphasize is the part of the issue here we're going to do is we're going to try to talk about ethics and some of the challenges we face on a day-in, day-out basis. Okay, now there's some overriding core principles, and these are things that if you can't remember the ethics code, you don't have access to it, fall back on these overriding core principles. However, as you can well imagine, they're open for interpretation. Do good, avoid doing harm. Your interpretation of what it is may be different than yours, may be different than yours. So you do need to have supplemental guidance from an actual code of ethics that's specific to your profession. And by the way, these codes, apply to psychologists, social workers, medical people. So you can see these are kind of fundamental moral codes that then get put into a more specific set of guidelines that we call an ethics guidelines or compliance code. But most of them are pretty straightforward. Respecting autonomy, respecting the right of individuals to serve to make decisions, according dignity, promoting self-determination. Those are things that are probably core values that many of you bring into what you do on a day-in, day-out basis. Be just, do not discriminate based on sex, gender, ethnicity, religion, or anything like that. Now, there are categories where you can discriminate. Remember, I teach courses, and if you don't answer anything right, I have to give you a C or a D. I can discriminate like that based on relevant, valid performance measures, but not based on something other than, well, you're wearing glasses, therefore you get a D or something like that, and you don't wear glasses, well, somebody doesn't wear glasses, therefore you get a better grade or something. It has to be a relevant performance dimension, obviously. Being truthful, pretty straightforward, pursuing excellence, and accepting responsibility. Does anybody have any other values they want to add to that? Those are the fundamental core values. Does anybody say, wait a minute, let's strike that one out? Yes?
Well, we're trying to guide the autonomy of often very impaired children. And
Mark, speak into this. Since we have a, can I get it? Let me. Yeah.
Very often we're not concerned with respecting so much the autonomy of our clients, but giving them skills and deterring them from a lot of autonomous behavior that might be self-injurious, immature.
Maybe illegal, maybe dangerous to somebody else, whatever.
Or themselves.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you make a good point, Mark, is that there is some limits to most all of these things, including respecting autonomy. I'm always fond of telling people that I have the right to swing my arms around until your face or your nose gets in the way. Am I swinging my arms around? There's always limits on all of these rights and guidelines right here. In that particular one right there, when a person's doing their autonomy causes serious damage to another person, then you can just say, well, wait a minute, let's think through that carefully and prepare them to make good judgments as it relates to their autonomy. So those are some considerations. Good point, Mark.
Yeah, and I'm spending all of my day manipulating children, rewarding them, trying to nudge them this way, nudge them that way.
And the fact that you said, I like the fact you said nudge, because that implies that you aren't doing such an onerous, restrictive intervention that there's no room for choice. You're moving people with reinforcement and nudging them in the right direction.
When they stop smiling, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. So thank you, Mark. Good comment. I can reach over here. Thank you. Okay. So moving on. So those are some of the fundamental precepts right there. Moving on, let me point out that there's a lot of things that are recurring ethical challenges that behavior analysts we're going to face. And sometimes when I do this workshop, I will start off with the part where I say, okay, here are some of the, what are the ethical challenges you face in your practice, in your daily work, whatever it may happen to be. And a lot of times it's interesting to see, well, what is the concurrence, places where they all line up, where are the places where they disagree. But if you're doing this sort of work on ethics in your own organization, in your home, in your university or whatever, I really recommend that you begin to take a look at this list and other lists like it and go, what are the challenges? Why don't you put your effort, put your money where the action is, so to speak. Put your effort where you get the highest risk and the best return on investment. And some of these are pretty straightforward, and we have a few role plays in here that illustrate some of these. One of them is relying on scientific knowledge. How do we get BCBAs to rely on scientific knowledge and parents to also make decisions based on good science? And we do have at least a role play in here where parents will sometimes come in and ask, well, let's try out this latest fad treatment I saw on the internet or something like that. How do you respond to that? So that's a fairly common recurring one. Boundaries of competence. By the way, how many people in here are BCBAs? I'm assuming most everybody, most of you folks are? Okay. Boundaries of competence, even in BCBA, you have to recognize that, maybe there's some populations I haven't worked with. I haven't worked with elderly, or I don't work that much with adolescents. I work with mostly young kids, or I don't have a lot of experience doing a functional assessment and a functional analysis. So there's some respect there for boundaries of competence, and how do you manage that and acknowledge it. Multiple relations. We'll have an example of this in a few minutes. One of the real challenges people have is how do you deal with gifts as it relates to interacting with clients and patients and stuff like that. So by their very nature, having a multiple relationship, including a gift, something as simple as a gift, may compromise or change your ability to discharge your professional obligations in an objective and fair manner. So we'll talk a little bit about that. You can scan down through, and I won't go through each one of these in detail, but what I would encourage you to do is to ask yourself how many of these things are relevant to the situations in which I might be working, operating, acting. I've added a few recently to it based on some interesting things that have been happening. That is sexual harassment in there. We've certainly had a number of cases, including some well-known behavior analysts that have been accused of sexual harassment. And we've certainly seen a lot of this with the Me Too movement. So one of the things is how do you prevent that from happening, and how do you respond if it does happen? We've also had a few situations with fraudulent billing. And even though that's not exactly an ethical issue because it's a legal issue, but there's a lot of overlapping right there in terms of how do you prevent that from happening, and how do you design a work site where you aren't likely to ever have that happen. So some of these issues are kind of permeate to that, okay? Okay, so those are some of the recurring issues, and I won't elaborate on those very much, but the reason I have them up there is because in a few minutes I'm going to put you into some teams, and I'm going to give you a choice of working on a role play that I already have prepared, or else coming up with your own. And some of these up here might make for interesting your own role plays. Okay? Okay, so I'm assuming since you're here, I hope, that you have some interest in acting ethically in your practice, in your running your business, whatever it may happen to be. So what do you need? One of them is, a starting point is familiarity of the Behavior Analysis Certification Board. PECC is called Professional Ethics Compliance Code. Or are there any people from other professions here? Okay, what are you from? Teaching?
I'm an LPC and BCBA.
Okay, so you have some of that. Okay, so the speech pathology and speech therapy folks and the teachers also have an ethics code. So in some ways what we're talking about is generic to everything. You need to be familiar with your ethics code. I'm going to say that's not enough. You can memorize your ethics code to the point where you can quote things, but the real bottom line is, can you detect what's going on? Is that an ethical issue? And how do you get yourself prepared to take action to solve it? So I think that it's really good if you're familiar with it. And by the way, when we get to doing some role plays, I have up here copies of the Professional Ethics Compliance Code up here from the BACB that you can reference. But I don't think you have to memorize it. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes is from Albert Einstein, who says, "I don't have to have a good memory because I have a good library." So some of these things don't have to be memorized. You simply have to be able to say, "Here, I know where to go, and here's the guidelines that I need to actually apply." Okay? The other thing is it really helps to have some sort of a public commitment to adhere to the PECC. Certainly when you get your BCBA, that involves some public commitment to do that. The more public, the better the commitment is. When we bring students into our program at Western Michigan University, one of the very first things we do is have student orientation, and we say that one of the things we want you to do is to sign this statement saying that I agree to adhere to the best of my ability to this ethics code and the APA ethics code or whatever else it may happen to be that is relevant. So getting some sort of a public commitment, because we're pretty good at following through on things that we've done publicly. And if I've seen you made a commitment and I see you messing up, I go, don't forget about this commitment over here that you made. So it brings to bear some level of social pressure. So those are all good things. Once again, necessary but not sufficient. Next steps then. What else do you need? One of them is, I'm going to call it signal detection skills. Anybody know what signal detection is? It really comes out of research during World War II where people were looking at radar screens trying to detect, is that an enemy plane that should be shot down, or is that an allied friendly plane? So it's any situation where you have this ambiguous, complicated set of stimuli out there in the world that you're having to detect whether you have enemy plane, allied plane, or in this case, taking the analogy further, that's an ethical issue or not an ethical issue. And one of the challenges we face is that you're all busy. I'm busy. Life comes at you. And how do you begin to say, wait, that's an ethical issue. I need to kind of think with my ethical hat on. So that's a really helpful thing. And getting it wrong can really create some problems. Let me give you an example, an historical example where people got it wrong. Anybody here old enough to remember the Ford Pinto? Okay. You had one? I'm glad you're still here. For those who are younger or don't remember the Ford Pinto, it was a small car, one of the very first small semi-fuel efficient cars that Ford came out with. Volkswagen had come out with a Rabbit about a year before, and all these U.S. companies were going, oh my gosh, we've got to hurry up and compete and get out there with a similar car to get that market for people who want fuel-efficient, smaller cars. And they got it out in record time and started selling like hotcakes, and then they discovered there was a design flaw in the Pinto. Okay, who remembers the design flaw? Yes, way back there in the back.
Sharp intruding edges angled toward the gas tank so that when the car was hit in a rear-end collision of, say, more than just a fender bender, the gas tank would rupture and the car would often burst into flames.
Right. To repeat for those people on live stream, there was a design flaw in the gas tank. It had a number of sharp things around it. It wasn't very well reinforced, and it was located way in the back of the car where even a minor collision, 10, 15 miles per hour, would oftentimes rupture the gas tank, send the car up in flames, and kill the occupants. Okay? Now, the interesting thing was, fairly early on, Ford knew that. And they had this interesting decision, and this gets, uncovered with, some of the memos at the time. They said, okay, what is the cost of settling wrongful death lawsuits versus the cost of recalling all of these Ford Pintos that are out there and retrofitting it at the cost of about $75 or $80 so that the gas tank is not as vulnerable? Now, what they've done is they have not signal detected that this is an ethics decision. They have framed it as a business decision, isn't it? They've said, it costs less to settle these wrongful death lawsuits, therefore, let's let those things go and maybe we'll get it in our next cycle of production or something like that. And eventually it was found out, and you can imagine the level of PR damage that was done to the Ford Motor Company. I mean, when you buy a product, you expect it to be designed so it's not going to kill you with normal use. Well, cigarette industry, okay, I won't talk about those guys, okay? But the interesting thing is, think about that as a signal detection problem. They did not detect that this is an ethics issue, and they had an ethical obligation to do no harm and provide a safe product and to be transparent and truthful in what was going on. So the reason I use that as an example is to, once again, encourage you to think along the lines of, gosh, on your day-in, day-out basis, how do you detect and respond to the ethics issues, the ethical challenges? And sometimes it helps to have people around you that if you're missing it, they'll go, hey, how about this? What are you thinking on this one right here? Or do you have any ethical concerns on this particular area over here? So it helps to have a cadre of colleagues that are respectful and supportive and help you stay attuned to the ethics issues that you might miss. Then, we also know that people tend to have an intuitive emotional reaction to kind of ethical and moral transgressions. Not a behavior analyst, but a popular psychologist by the name of Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T, has written about this. He has some interesting examples. Let me give you one example, and let me just get you to kind of monitor your intuitive and emotional reaction, okay? The example Jonathan Haidt, this is paraphrased, is something like this. Mark and Julie are in their early 20s. They've just graduated from college, and to celebrate their graduation from college, they're traveling around Europe and seeing the sights. One night, their lodging doesn't work out, so they only have one room available, and they decide to sleep in the same room. And they say, well, wouldn't it be nice to make love? We're adults, and besides, Julie was on birth control, and Mark says, just to be safe, let's use a condom. Emotional reaction thus far? And then when I tell you, and by the way, Mark and Julie are brother and sister. Okay, for those who are on live stream, there's grimaces, there's laughing, there's like, that sort of thing. Now, the reason I use that as an example is notice the emotional reaction you get to it. And a lot of times when there's an ethical problem, a moral challenge or transgression, we go, oh, wait a minute, okay? Most of the time, those are good gut instincts. But you can sometimes make a snap judgment and not quite do things right. Like you can sometimes violate the rights of a client, for example, or fail to provide best quality services thinking it's fine, or do a little extra billing or something like that. So one of the things to kind of I'm encouraging you to be a little cautious about is to begin asking yourself, well, why is that the right or the wrong thing to do? And I'm not going to try to convince you that incest is okay. I don't think it's okay myself, okay? But it is interesting for you as an academic exercise to step back and go, wait a minute, why is that so wrong? They're consenting adults, not likely to have a child. And even if they had a child, some of the worries about from all the British monarchies about all this genetic aberrations, it's low probability compared to some things. So you'd have to ask yourself, gosh, why is this so wrong, you know? To give you one other example of an intuitive reaction, sometimes how it might go wrong. I was traveling not too long ago, driving down the interstate, and it was time for a bathroom and a coffee break. So I stopped at one of the ubiquitous fast food restaurants that are there. Went into the restroom and went into the stall and sat down in the stall, and I looked up on top of the toilet paper dispenser, and there was a handgun. And I went, oh, you can imagine what I said. Maybe it was multiply controlled by the fact I was there in the toilet as well as looking at the gun and stuff like that, okay? And my first reaction was, let me grab that gun and walk out there and put it down on the counter and say, look what I found in here. Fortunately, I was having to sit on the toilet for a minute or two and think about that, and I thought, you know, maybe that's not the best emotional, intuitive reaction to have, because as soon as I walk out there waving a gun, set it down on the counter, if I'm one of the employees here, I'm going to freak out, number one. And number two, if you happen to have a concealed carry permit back there in the back, you or somebody like that, you see some guy with a gun up there on the counter and people freaking out, what are you going to do? Okay. That was probably not, I was glad that I had a little time to reflect on my course of action, essentially. Okay, so do recognize that sometimes an emotional, intuitive reaction, oftentimes is good, it warns you, but you need to kind of sometimes have people to, either yourself or even better yet, a supportive but critical audience to talk through these things and say, yeah, this is the best course of action, or, you know, there's the options right over here, and have you considered this option over here? So, as I have up here, I recommend that you have a discussion, hopefully with supportive colleagues. By the way, how many of you guys work at an agency of some sort? If you don't already have an ethics support group or an ethics discussion group, I really recommend you start one. and you build it so that they provide discussions to help you analyze the situation, to help you critique resolution strategies. Okay? Anybody want to know what I did with the gun? Yeah. First of all, I didn't do what I just said I was going to do, okay? I took toilet paper out, and I wrapped the gun up without me touching it. I was thinking to myself, you know, if this is an illegal gun or it's been used in a crime, I don't want my fingerprints on it, first of all. So I wrapped it up so you couldn't tell what it was. So I'm going to be able to leave the bathroom. I called the manager of the store. I didn't go up to the counter. I said, can I please see the manager? Let me go over to the side. And I had this thing all wrapped in toilet paper, so it didn't look like I was a threat. I don't think I look like I'm a threat anyhow, but maybe I do. I don't know. And I said, I'd like you to know that I found a gun in the bathroom. I would like to suggest you call the state police and have them come over and collect the gun from you. And the person agreed to do that. And I walked away with my life in hand and stuff like that, okay? But once again, notice that what I did is I kind of said to myself, okay, what are the options here? What should I do? What's the best option? By the way, I could have just walked out and left the gun sitting there. I thought about doing that. And you're going, no, why not? Yeah. My first thought was, I'm not going to leave a gun sitting around where a kid can go in and go, look at this, Dad, look what a boom. Something like that. Yeah. So do recognize that what I did, and once again, I don't know if that's the best solution or not. It seemed like it was a reasonable solution. But what I did is I thought through the options. What are the pros and cons of each of these options? And the reason I use that as an example, by the way, is just to encourage you to think through all the different options and how you understand, resolve, and analyze an ethics scenario. Excuse me. The other thing I'd like to emphasize right here, and we're going to do some of this, is you need to plan and rehearse and implement some sort of a solution. It's one thing to say, yep, that's an ethical violation right here, code 1.03. But it's a whole different thing to say, and here's what you do about it. Here's how you correct it, hopefully in a tactful manner, hopefully without ostracizing people, that sort of thing. And then also here's how you go about designing policy in your agency so that if other people run into the same ethical issue, they'll know what to do. Okay? So plan, rehearse, and implement a solution. Evaluate the impact of that solution. Did it solve the problem? And by the way, there's hardly any perfect solutions, by the way. It's on a continuum. It's shades of gray. I probably should quit using that term since it got to be a popular movie. It's on a continuum, okay? It brings all the wrong connotations into account there. So it certainly is on a continuum, and you need to think along the lines of, you know, better or worse solutions, that sort of thing, and try to get you and other people to move increasingly towards better and better solutions. Once you've had an ethical issue emerge, I always say to myself, I bet somebody else, if they haven't already, they will encounter this ethical issue. So then the question then becomes, what do you do in your agency, your business, in your department, or whatever it may happen to be, to prepare people to deal with something like that? Sometimes it involves policy change. If you do policy change, it also probably involves dissemination and education, maybe discussion about whether that policy is the best policy. And a lot of you folks probably have now policies on gifts, on what do you do when you go into a person's home to provide services, what do you do if a person becomes agitated and violent. So you have a lot of policies that are out there along those lines. And the last thing I'd also point out is you probably need organizational contingencies to support ethical behavior and discourage violations. So once again, acknowledging that people are doing the right thing and providing time for an ethics support group or an ethics discussion panel or bringing people in to do an ethics workshop, those are all important things that an organization can do to prevent things in the future. So that seems like to me that's the rest of the behavioral repertoire, and look how far it goes beyond just reading the PECC or this speech and learning language pathology code or the education code or whatever it may happen to be. Okay? And we're going to try to practice a lot of that stuff in just a minute. Okay, now one of the things that will be kind of cutting through a lot of the role plays that we do is when possible, your ethics code suggests that when possible you should try to resolve ethical issues informally by typically calling it to the attention of the violator. I've done lots of that over the course of my career, and most of the time the reaction has been, oh, I didn't think of that. Thank you. Every now and then I get people very defensive. Every now and then I get people counterattacking. Oh, yeah, it's not my fault, it's your fault, or something like that. But once again, the basics of the code here is you're trying to encourage people to be ethical and ensure ethical services for your clients. So once again, do it informally, typically by bringing it to the attention of the individual. Now, it does have some caveats in here that you can't violate the confidentiality in bringing it to the attention of the individual. And that can be a source of frustration. I know in my role as department chairperson, every now and then I'd have a student come to me complaining about another student or a faculty member, and I'll say something like, you know, in order for me to take action on this, I need to have your permission to identify you or identify the specifics of the complaint, with the caveat that there's whistleblower protection and no retaliation and stuff like that. And sometimes I wouldn't get permission to do it. So I go, well, I can't do anything. I feel terrible, you know. So sometimes the confidentiality ties your hands, but once again, you have to ask yourself a little questions about how do I make it safe for people to come forward with a concern, with a complaint, that sort of thing, and do it with due process whenever possible. Generally speaking, the interventions should be less to more intrusive. That's something you probably are very familiar with, but generally speaking, if you start off with, let me just give you some feedback, or is there any way for you to get your stuff in on time, those are relatively low intrusive interventions. When you begin to say, I need to have a contract that if you don't do the following, then there's going to be a disciplinary action, you're going to get fired, you're going to have X, Y, and Z happen. So those are all things that need to be thought through in terms of less to more intrusive. I will tell you that there are indeed some exceptions there, really severe violations. Every now and then we see people doing things that are just awful, abusing the rights of our clients or abusing a coworker or something of that nature. You can't do less to more intrusive under those situations. You've got to take action to fix it as quickly as possible. Certainly legal violations. If you see people engaging in insurance fraud, Medicare fraud, that is a legal violation. You need to take action. You can't go just less to more intrusive typically into those situations. And every now and then you need supplemental help to resolve a case. And by that, what I'm talking about, and this is an analogy I learned from John Bailey, which I think is a nice analogy. How many of you folks have ever been whitewater rafting? Okay, so you know the rivers are graded, like from 1, which is like the easy stream at Walt Disney World, up to 6 is death-defying, and you're lucky if you're going to survive this sort of thing. Ethical challenges are like that too, aren't they? Some of them are pretty easy, and you can resolve them. Others get more complicated because you're dealing with people in powerful positions. You're dealing with people that can retaliate against you. You're dealing with people where you have very little authority. Or maybe you're even dealing with things where policy is not well established in your agency. Or maybe you have to think along the lines of how do you get state laws and policies to change. So those get much more complicated. So sometimes you have to ask for supplemental help and organize people around on a particular issue. But once again, most of what you're going to deal with on a day-in, day-out basis is probably going to be a relatively easy thing that can probably be resolved, at least initially, by an informal effort. And your job is to ameliorate harm and prevent further violations, obviously. Okay, now I'm going to put you to work in a few minutes with some informal resolutions. And let me give you kind of a little guide to some things that might help you a little bit. I have some do's and I have some don'ts up here. Okay, this is basic communication, basic assertiveness skills. It's not a bad idea to schedule a private time to talk. Probably is going to be, if you have a concern with my ethicality, probably raising your hand while we have a live broadcast in front of a whole bunch of people and say, well, what about this? It's probably not the best time to talk because I'll be defensive or denial or something like that. So you need to think along the lines of, let's schedule a private time to talk. Now, there is some caveats with that, and that is that sometimes you schedule private time to talk and you have a person who's volatile and resistant. You need to always think a little bit about safety issues here. So if every now and then if I had to confront a student at Western about something, And I thought this person could be, because sometimes you get students that are really pretty volatile and very threatened by any confrontation. There was a couple of times I made sure I had someone outside my office available if that was a problem. Sometimes I've had public safety officers available if I thought I had a student who made some threats, physical threats against a faculty member, so I had to bring the student in and have a discussion with them. So be smart about private time to talk. Make it in a public venue or make precautions, for your safety, that sort of thing, okay? So that's a consideration. Do describe the facts and observations. Here's what I saw. Here's what I did. Emphasize facts, not your interpretation of the facts, because we're going to get down to the bottom in a second and say, don't infer intentions. You're lazy. You don't give a damn about your work here. You're, cheating or whatever it may happen to be. Actually focus on what the people did or did not do. Those are observable, those are verifiable, okay? And it's hard to argue with that. Listen actively and consider the context. Most of you, many of you are trained as behavior analysts. We know that the context is critical for motivating behavior, don't we? It is the same with respect to ethical lapses and ethical violations. Ask yourself, why would this person have done this? What are the motivational factors? Was it that just the easy way to do things, or were they getting some sort of surreptitious payoff for it? So try to understand where people are coming from, understand what their behavior is. It doesn't make it that it is acceptable, it simply helps you understand why the behavior is there, because it may help you come up with an intervention that might solve that particular problem. Okay? Listen actively, and I already said that one. Do try to understand other person's perspective and motivation. Curiosity, not blaming at this particular stage. I'm curious as to why you did that. Why didn't you get your work turned in? Why did you take this particular action? So take that as your formative strategy there. Do give an opportunity from someone you're confronting to explain what was going on. Every now and then people come up with a good explanation. I've had students come up with explanations that go, yeah, I didn't think about that. You make a good point. I find that to be perfectly ethically acceptable. Do hold that out as a possibility. So do have an opportunity for explanation, and do have an opportunity for remedial action. So a person sometimes was volunteer, you're right, I'll get this done, or I'll get it changed, or something like that. If they don't come up with that, then do the next thing. You need to request a specific change. I need you to stop doing this or start doing this. That's going to solve the ethical issue. And I really recommend you also put in a time frame there. I've had students where I said, you need to get this particular document in. You need to get your draft of your thesis in or something like that. And 6 months later I go, I asked you to get it in. They go, well, I'm working on it. I'm still working on it. And how much longer are they going to be working on it, So especially if it's an important ethical issue involving client service or something like that, or working with a coworker or something like that, you may need to put a time frame on it, saying we need to get this done by XYZ, okay? Do be prepared to move to more intrusive interventions. We recommend that you think along the lines of starting with less intrusive interventions, but if they don't work, then you need to think, what is my next step? And this is the place for having a support group to talk things through. If this doesn't work, where do I go next? That can really be helpful, essentially. Do emphasize shared goals. When you're working with, let's say, parents or service recipients, I like to use the word we every time I possibly can. We're really interested in the very best quality of life for your child, your daughter or son or whatever, and you are too. So let's work together as a team, and we can do the following, and here's one of the ways that we get this accomplished. So if you join together with what we call a we framing, essentially, it's less you, them, us, them, and it's more a collaborative framework. So I really recommend when you possibly can to do that. Okay? And here's some things to not do. Don't infer intentions. You don't care. You're lazy. You hate this person or whatever. Well, some of that may be true, but you can't tell what the person's intentions are just from observing their behavior, essentially. That's a great place for arguments. Oh, no, I'm not lazy. I'm just busy with a bunch of other stuff, Okay. Don't blame others. Don't call names. Well, this seems pretty straightforward, but I can't believe how many things devolve into an argument when the person starts calling a name. You're a slacker. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not calling other names. You can imagine the names that people get called, okay? Don't use absolutes. Always, never. Any of you guys ever had an argument with your spouse about whose turn it is to wash dishes? You never wash the dishes. Oh, yeah, I can remember on Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I think I washed them. Okay, that devolves into an argument, doesn't it? You're much better off to simply say, you didn't do this. Not never, not always. You didn't do it at a certain time. And yeah, I really appreciate if you'd give me some help with this sort of thing. So, okay? So, be aware, here are some suggestions right here that may make it a little more effective with your discussion with people. Okay? Anybody else? By the way, I don't know that I have all the right things up here. Does anybody see anything here that they need to add or that I'd like to object to? Yes, sir. Hold on. Informed consent. You're suggesting informed consent to talk with a person?
Well, I'm saying that one of the things that as practitioners, medical practitioners, we always have to be careful about is to provide informed consent and seek it
Right.
whoever we're treating.
Right.
Discuss the treatment, the upside, the downside, and not presume that, well, I think this is best. I think the parents would agree. We have to get informed consent. We do that with the treatment plan, but with
Right.
all the other stuff we're trying, we really need that as a guiding goal.
Yeah. Your point is a very decent point, Mark, and that is you always do informed consent regardless where you are, and it may also apply to some of these discussions here. If you're having to violate confidentiality to confront an ethical issue, you need to get consent for the person. Can I raise this particular issue? Now, there's a lot of places where you don't have to worry about that. If you're working within your agency, then typically informed consent includes all the people in my agency that have a right or a need to know. So do recognize that it's a little bit broader than you might be thinking, but you also need to make sure that if you're going to be having to violate informed consent to pursue an ethical issue, if you're having to violate privacy, you should be getting informed consent, and your point is right on target there. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am. I'll repeat it, by the way, to the live stream audience. Yes.
We had a new department chair this year, and one of the things she would do, if there was an issue, she would start the conversation with "talk to me about" and present the issue, and it's amazing how effective it is.
Oh, yeah. And the nice thing about that is this, the comment was, we have a new department chair, and she now begins conversations with "talk to me about." And that gives you permission in a non-punitive strategy to talk about things. People sometimes are so punitive about someone talking about or even admitting that they might have failed ethically in some way, shape, or form that people simply hide it and don't do anything about it. Which, by the way, I think is a very bad strategy. You want to, once again, maybe correct the behavior, but not punish the person to the point where they simply will not come forward again and talk about and share a concern.
Very little information. It's just talk to me about the subject. And
Right.
It really leaves it very open.
Those are all good strategies. And by the way, I'm hoping that the people in the audience, as people also in live streaming, are thinking, how do you begin to apply this sort of strategy in my agency to improve ethicality under those contexts? Okay? Okay, anything else anybody wants to add to that one? Okay, I won't belabor this one at all, by the way. We're going to emphasize informal resolutions originally, but if informal resolutions either don't work or they're not appropriate, then you need to think along the lines of what else do you do next. If you haven't already done it, I would recommend you take a look at the BACB website. There's a bunch of guidelines there about how do you file a concern about an ethical violation and what is the process for that. So rather than me repeat it here, let me just simply reference you to the BACB website, okay? Okay, so here's what we're going to do, and here's what I'd recommend you consider doing back in your agency or wherever it is that you're working collaboratively with a bunch of people. Develop some case studies. Ideally, case studies that are manageable by informal resolution, at least initially, but are hopefully relevant and prevalent or recurring ethical issues in your agency. You need to respect confidentiality. So in just a second, when I've put you guys together in teams, I'm going to give you a choice of either 4 or 5 cases that I've developed, but I'm also going to give you the option to say, okay, team number 1, if you want to develop your own case, no problem, but it has to be resolvable potentially by an informal interaction, and you have to protect confidentiality. Okay? Team discussion. The role of the team is to say, is this an ethical issue? If so, can it be resolved informally, and which ethical principles are relevant? So when I put you together in teams and give you some cases, you're going to have to take a look maybe at the Professional Ethical Compliance Code and say, well, gosh, what does it look like is most relevant here? Okay? Discussion ground rules in the teams. Confidentiality is respected, certainly. No punishment. If someone has a divergent idea from you, this is not the time to punish. This is the time to nod your head and say, yeah, let me consider that. I hadn't thought about that. Let me think about it. Or maybe that sounds interesting, but I like this other strategy better. Do it respectfully, okay? Constructive problem-solving approach. Always looking to solve problems rather than blame people, okay? Identify and discuss the pros and cons of resolution strategies. So one of the things we want to do is we want to prepare people like you're learning to ride a bicycle or something, so that every time you've rehearsed a resolution strategy for an ethical issue, you get a little bit better. Even if you don't have the exact same issue going on, you develop some skills and you're learning now to resolve some of these issues. Role plays, and this is the part you're going to love, I hope, is in your teams, I'm going to have you work on an ethics case, and then I'm going to say, okay, team number 1, come up here and do a role play showing us how you're going to resolve this particular ethics issue. And so hopefully rehearse or refine it and resolve the ethical issue. Now, the rest of the teams, you don't get to sit around and go, oh, isn't that nice? The rest of the teams, I'm going to give you a nice little table stanchion or something like that with some cards on it, and I'm going to, after the other team has performed, you're going to have to decide, did they get one of those, an A, a B, a BA, a C, and I'm not going to let you just give them a grade, but you're going to have to also give a rationale. What did you like? What did you not like? And every now and then, I may call on these teams that are grading another team that just performed. I may say, show me how you do it better. Oh, no. So, but notice what is happening right here. That forces you to be evaluative and think through what you're seeing and ask yourself, could I do it better? What's good about this? And once again, it is a skill that you learn, essentially, okay? Okay, so other teams critique and offer to demonstrate improvements. And once you've gone through a couple of role plays, then what I'm always interested in is asking people, well, if this has happened once in your agency or once in your life, it's probably going to happen again to you or other people. What strategies, policies do you need at the agency level that might prevent this from happening, or give people at least guidance as to how do you handle this in the future, okay? So the role plays. I have, once again, 4 or 5. These tend to be recurring issues that I see a lot. Let me read them to you, and then what I'm going to do is how are we doing on time? I'll probably give people a short break, and then we'll come right back, and I'll put you together in teams in a few minutes, and your job in the team is to decide, do I want to do role play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll give these out to you. And by the way, it's first come, first serve. I'm not going to let 3 teams do role play number 1. So as soon as you decide what it is I want to do, you let me know, okay? Or you can also develop your very own role play, okay? So here's one of them. You've been providing ABA services to Jeremiah, a 4-year-old diagnosed with autism. He's been making steady but slow progress in the development of verbal and academic skills. One day his mother approaches you and says, I saw this fantastic show on TV about advances in autism treatment. They proved that the use of a special diet plus the placement of a stocking cap with magnets on a child's head can reprogram their brains and cure autism within months. I'd like to enroll Jeremiah in this therapy. What do you say? What do you do? And by the way, if you want to substitute some other kind of fad treatment in there, feel free to substitute any. I just had to pick one or two out of the hundreds that are out there, okay? That's one case. And if we do this one, you need to have a parent who will be realistic, and a BCBA or an RBT or whatever. You need to think about who you need to have doing that demonstration. Okay? This one right over here. At school, you typically walk the children out to the covered parking area where their parents pick them up after school. One day you walk Samantha out to her mother's car and notice the distinct smell of alcohol when you open the door for Samantha. You ask her mother if she's okay, and she says, "Sure. I've been watching basketball all afternoon with friends. And I'm going to take Samantha to the zoo. It's a great day. Hop in, Samantha." I need to have a good drunk mother or drunk father, okay? I'm not very good at that role, okay? What do you say or do? Okay. Next one. You've been providing social skills training in language for Quinn, a 5-year-old child on the autism spectrum. He's been making remarkable progress in initiating social interactions and talking appropriately. When you go to greet Quinn and his mother in the busy waiting room of your school program, Quinn's mother nudges Quinn and he runs up to you saying, "Dr. Tom," or whoever you want it to be, "I got you a Christmas present," and hands you a small object that is wrapped sloppily in Christmas paper. What do you say or do? Now, if you choose this one, you need to have multiple role players, probably even including some other parents in the waiting room. Case number 4. You have just obtained your BCBA credential and accepted a job at a growing autism services agency. Everything is great for 6 months, but the agency director starts assigning more and more cases to you and the other 3 BCBAs at your agency. You get 3 new cases and you politely raise your concerns with the director. And she says, "We're trying to hire another BCBA, but until we do so, you'll just need to take some shortcuts and be more efficient, like the other BCBAs. We can't turn customers away, and don't forget, this is a business. We exist to make a profit. That allows us to pay your salary." Now what do you say? And if you'd like to, by the way, all of these you can up the ante on and make them a little more difficult. If you'd like to up the ante on this one, the last part is, what if you've signed a non-compete clause? Okay? And the last one. I haven't done this in a group before. I've got just put this one together. You tell me whether or not it's actually in any way realistic or not. At your autism services agency, it is common practice for some BCBAs to specialize in younger children and others to specialize in adolescents. Your office mate, Pat, a BCBA, has inherited one of your former clients, Nick, who is now 14. When you worked with Nick at a younger age, progress is slow, partly because you had difficulty finding effective reinforcers. However, Nick seems to be making good progress with Pat. You compliment Pat on the progress, and Pat smiles, saying, "It's all about finding effective reinforcers." One day, Pat leaves Nick's file on the desk in your shared office, and you take a peek. You're surprised to see that Pat has arranged some unusual reinforcers for Nick, including access to porn and trips to a gun range. What do you do or say? Okay. So those are 5 potential role plays. You don't have to necessarily accept any one of them, but you are going to be needing to do at least a role play, okay? And let me do it this way. I have maybe 15 or 16 people in here. Let me do 3 teams, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Let me do 3 teams of 5, okay? Can you remember your numbers if I count you off? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's take a break here. When we come back, I'd like the 1s to assemble up here, the 2s to assemble over there, and how about the 3s kind of back there in the middle, okay? Okay, how about a 5-minute break, and come back and assemble into the teams, okay? Okay, do you remember which group you're with? 2 is over there, right? Okay. Those people on the live stream, quick comment. If you have a group of people with you at the live stream location, I would really recommend you work up one of these role plays and try it out with your live stream location. Okay? What I've handed out, by the way, to the teams here is I've handed out a worksheet. You do not necessarily have to fill this out, but this will give you some structure. So the worksheet is really designed to help you identify what the scenario is, to remind you to take a quick look at the Professional Ethical Compliance Code, and every team has maybe 2 or 3 of those codes. And then the part that you'll love the best is you're going to have to come up with a cast. Who's playing what role? And if you need extra people for your cast, let me know. We'll recruit somebody else for you. And then at the end of it, well, actually, before you get to that, if you want to, you don't have to do this, but talk about the barriers and the needed resources you may need. And in particular, I will ask you, what is your next strategies and how do you go about preventing this in the future? Okay? So that will help structure some of your challenges. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the teams not very long, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to talk amongst the team, work out who has what role, think through about what is the ethical challenges and where does it relate to the code, and be prepared to do a role play in, let's say, 10 minutes or so. I will circulate around offering any help that I can, but I'm going to put you on stage before too long. Sorry. Okay, I'm going off again. Oh, did team number 3 come up with a role play? Number 4. Okay, very good. I'm going to go back on the live stream for just a minute. Is that okay? I've just asked team 2, role play 1, to come up and get set up to do their role play demonstration. For those on the live stream, I would recommend that you observe the role play and have a discussion about what was the strengths and the weaknesses and any things that you would suggest in terms of improvements, because that will also be replicated here in this particular group. And then off stream, when later on, I would recommend you try out the role plays on your very own also. So let me turn things over the floor to team number 1. Now, there's going to be a complication here, team 1, and that is for the people on the live stream to hear you. I need to give you microphones. Mark and Dee. I'm not sure how to turn this one on. I may need a little assistance from back there. Is that on? Nope. Sorry, Dee. We'll let you talk in just a second, okay? Or would you like me to use the lavalier mics?
Hello? I guess
Mark's on. Oh, I didn't have quite enough latency on this, did I?
Yeah, just watch it too when it turns on.
Test 1, 2. Great. Okay. Now, if you'd rather have a lavalier mic, thank you very much. I can also give you one of those, okay? So, my job here, by the way, setting the stage. Where are you? Where is this action happening? This is role play number 1 about the mother who's interested in trying out alternative therapy. Okay, so you guys, it's up to you. Do we have a director? What's the stage? Who has what role?
Well,
Okay, I'm out of the way.
So, Mrs. Smith, I know you wanted to take me aside and talk to me about some your therapeutic concerns. Are you happy with the progress that Billy's been making and some of the breakthroughs? He's acquired some language and stuff.
Well, I'm okay with it, but I was at home yesterday afternoon and I was watching Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil started talking about this new program, and I just thought Jeremiah would do wonderful on this. You do a special diet, and no processed foods, so all natural. It's good. I looked into this, and then we're going to start him on this diet, and we're going to make him wear this cap. And you put magnets in the cap, and it cures autism. So I'm going to start doing this every day. We're doing this.
Well, the first thing I'm concerned about is that you said you're going to make him wear a stocking cap with magnets. Now, I know you saw this treatment on Dr. Phil and that you're very anxious for the welfare of your child. Mm-hmm. But according to the National Institutes of Health and the Surgeon General, so far the only evidence-based effective treatment for autism is ABA. I'm sure that if this treatment were effective and showed good results, that both of those agencies would be promoting it.
But they haven't had time yet. Dr. Phil said this is new. And there were people on there who said that their kids had autism. They had them with them, and that they were cured. It made all the difference.
Well, let me ask you this. Would this affect the treatment that we're providing on an ongoing basis for Billy? Are you thinking of doing this instead of the ABA or with it? Or?
Not right now. As long as you let him wear the stocking cap with magnets, and you make sure that you don't give him any processed food, I'm okay.
Well, I don't know if we can make him wear the stocking cap with magnets.
He has to have it on all the time.
Or whether that's in our scope of practice or a goal that we'd find therapeutically valid. But if you can come up with things and you choose to do that while we're doing therapy, we might be okay with that.
I've talked to him. He wants to do this. He wants to be cured.
Well, if it's not going to interfere with the therapy, and I don't see how having non-processed food, there are a number of, he likes fruit and grapes and apple slices.
No more gummy bears.
I'm sure we'll find something that's unprocessed that we can use as reinforcers, because that's very important. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to make him do anything that he find aversive and that might interfere with the therapy. If he's okay with wearing the stocking cap and you want to see if that works.
I believe in this treatment. I believe Dr. Phil.
Okay, you guys can wrap it up whenever you're ready, okay?
Well, we're ready to wrap it up.
Very good. Hold on to the mic just for a second, okay? Just out of curiosity, for other team members also, what did you see as the compelling PECC, the ethics code issues that Mark needed to be sensitive to in this situation?
Mainly it was 2.09 treatment.
Okay, Mark, can you give her how about that? Yeah.
Sure. The primary one, I don't think it's working. Is it? It says it's on. 2.09, treatment intervention efficacy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was the big one. And then also 1.01, reliance on scientific knowledge.
Right, absolutely. Okay, and the other part that I think you alluded to, Mark, is you were also a little concerned with scope of practice too, weren't you?
Right.
Or competence to practice, because the question was, are you going to be doing this, or is this something somebody else is going to do it? Okay. Now, is there another code in there about interventions that interfere with the efficacy of ABA? There's also one concern about that particular area. So, and you kind of alluded to this also, Mark. You were kind of like, well, is this going to happen at the same time ABA is going on also? Right. Okay.
Or interfering with the treatment.
Yeah, that's what I mean, interfering with the treatment. Right, right. You don't have to track it down exactly, but those are some of the things that cut through here, okay? Now, what I'd like to do is, you saw how Mark handled the situation with Dee, and by the way, you both were great. My compliments to both of you. Now, here's the thing you need to do now. We need to give them a grade, and in particular talk about what you liked, what could have been improved, and I may even ask one of you guys, maybe even other members of the team, to see if they can do a one-up on Mark in terms of how do you make it even better, okay? You are not off the hook, by the way. I will always call on the team that just did the role play to do a self-evaluation, okay? All of you have a set of letters, A, B, C, D, E. So your job is to have, I'm only going to give you about 2 minutes or so, a discussion in your teams about what grade this gets for resolution of this particular ethical challenge, and then I'm going to call on you to kind of talk about why you gave those grades. Okay? Go to it. 2 minutes or so. People on the live stream, spend some time talking about what you liked, what you didn't like, what could have been better. That's the other thing to do on the live stream. Any question for clarification? Oh, not yet. Okay, hang on a second, okay?
And I think oh, that was perfect. Oprah loves it. It's got to be valid.
Okay, you need to decide on a grade. Pick that out because I'm going to ask you to show it. Who has the grades over here? Lena, do you have grades? Who has the grades? Okay. Okay, good deal. So I'm going to be a little more directive here, okay? You're going to have to pull out a grade in a second here and be able to justify it.
Sure, if we have to grade our own.
Yes, you do have to grade your own team. There's a lot of research out there that self-evaluation is important.
What could we have done different?
You guys have a grade pulled out? Okay, great. Team number 2, do you have a grade pulled out? Oh, you're team 3, I'm sorry. Team 3. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, each of the teams, what I'd like you to do is show us a grade, okay? Hold it up so we can see what the grade is. Okay, an A, and an A. You guys are really generous graders, okay? Not to say that it wasn't good, but one of the things is I'm going to ask you, well, what went well and what do you think could have been even better, okay? So let me start over here with team number 1, and you do still have a microphone floating around over there?
Yeah.
You guys tell us, what did you like, and you don't have to be the same people, people go around. What did you like, and what do you think could have been a little bit better?
Okay, go ahead. You can do it. I like the fact that, and we talked about this, I like the fact that he mentioned research and said, that there's research supporting ABA.
Right.
I like that.
Very good.
Yeah, rather than just saying that that other approach is not research-based, presenting it in a more professional way.
And he didn't make her feel dumb about it or, anything like that, like, oh, that's stupid. Or something.
Okay. Well, Dee, you were in the role as the mom. How did you feel? Did he feel like he was acknowledging what you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I felt that he was going to be willing to do what I asked him, what I wanted to be done. He was questioning me, but that was because he didn't see the show.
If he'd seen Dr. Phil, he'd know it all.
So I didn't feel that he was talking down to me. I just felt that, I had to prove it.
Very good. Yeah, hop right in there, Dan.
The not arguing. Differences of opinion are going to occur in any treatment venue.
Right.
And so the idea is to keep open lines of communication. And, even if this is something that we're internally maybe rolling our eyes or cringing to some degree, it's okay, this is something mom's chosen to do. Ostensibly, she is in authority over this child.
Right.
We need to respect that so long as this is not something that is harmful.
Now, is there any discussion about innocuous interventions versus harmful interventions?
Well, tangentially, is this going to interfere with ongoing treatment? Or are you going to do this instead of the ABA or in conjunction with? and in a way that won't interfere with the treatment that we've been using, where the kid's been making progress
Right.
and being helped.
And that's all. Those are all good considerations. Now, how well did that come through in what Mark said? And by the way, this is not easy stuff to do. And the reason we're doing a practice run through is to say, how do we get better at doing it? I didn't hear some of the stuff that you're saying right now coming through to the mother. So the question then is, I'm going to pose it for everybody. How could this interaction have been even more effective? Because I think, Mark, you conveyed, I've got reservations about this. I didn't hear anything about innocuous versus potentially harmful. Any thoughts about how to make this even better?
Well, that was going through my mind, and in ABA,
couldn't see it.
We're outcomes based.
Yes.
So an A is, oh, I didn't think of that. I'm not going to do that.
Right.
If I could convince her not to do it, but I'm confronting an adamant, possibly desperate mom,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as it's not going to interfere with our program or do harm to the child, I'm not going to, really push that hard and say, well, it's either ABA or this crazy stuff,
Okay.
I mean, if you're letting us do valid treatment that'll help your child, and there's this palliative for you, so you can feel better that you're doing something,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't harm the child, doesn't interfere with needed therapy, I'm going to let the parent have I'm going to acquiesce to the parent that's so
Okay.
adamant. And
Okay.
I've had parents
Let me
like
see if,
that.
yeah, let me see if I think this is a good point. I agree with you. You certainly want to validate the mom, obviously. Jerry Ann?
Jerry Ann,
Yeah. Give it microphone, yeah.
You did bring up kind of, is the CAP going to be uncomfortable? Is the client, is the child not going to like it? I think we were kind of viewing magnets as innocuous. If we were talking about maybe chelation therapy or something that may have been more potentially harmful, it might have been a different scenario. But I think we were looking at magnets as, they're not going to truly harm the child.
And you might be right, but I don't know that for sure.
Right.
And
That was
I-
how
and
we
I
were
may
viewing
need
it.
to say, let me go back and check to see if that is safe for your child. And I also may need to ask, an additive-free diet, what actually goes into that? I may need to ask a nutritionist if that's safe. Let's say that additive-free diet, all natural fruits. And you go, wait a minute, this child is getting no calcium? How can you do that? You're going to have brittle bone syndrome or something like that. So you may need to think through a little bit about what could go wrong, because the last thing you want to have is this child having a terrible thing happen, broken bones or something like that, or brain cancer or something like that, and you go, I didn't even think about that, and I allowed it to happen. Not to say that you can necessarily prevent the mom from doing it, but you need to be thinking about, well, gosh, what all could go wrong, and how do I lower that risk here? Yeah. So let me see, one more comment from this group, and then because I want to get other people having some input here too. Any other comments?
Well, with what you said about serious consequences for a child, we started ABA therapy on a child that was non-compliant, a lot of tantrums, and we were getting some progress, got the kid not to tantrum in car rides and stuff, had some mild consequence, like stop the car so the entertainment outside the window stops. And then mom just announced, I don't know about this ABA therapy. I'm asking his doctor to double his medication. and I tried to prevail and say, you need to give this a chance. Numbing the child with more sedatives and things might be contraindicated. I'm not a physician, but
So
mom was very adamant, and I said, I'm going to have to give my notice on the case because I'm not going to watch this happen on my watch.
Okay.
I'm really against it. But
Mark is raising a different case, but it's also an important issue. If you find yourself involved in a case where you think something is dangerous for the child and you can't ethically say, I want to be part of it, there are some situations where you can say, listen, I need to remove myself from this case. So that is a consideration you might have. This one right here may not rise to that level, and as a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't remove myself immediately. I'd probably do everything I could to keep this child getting effective ABA therapy as long as possible and hopefully mitigate or do something to kind of prevent some of the other things that are dangerous.
Even if the kid makes a ton of progress and mom says, see, the magnets work.
Yep, okay.
Fine, not a problem.
Okay, so an A here, I can notice the good discussion about what did we do well and what could have been improved. I may ask you guys to come back and let's try an improvement in just a second, okay? So let's hear what the rest of the discussion is. Okay, you guys gave also an A. Here you go, 2 microphones. Tell us what you liked and tell us what you think could have been improved.
I liked how, again, stating the research, this is research-based, he's been making progress, we've been doing well with that, and trying to convince, like, this is the thing that's working, sort of thing. I thought you were mindful of the parent and her viewpoint of, I saw this, I think this will work, this is really great, and kind of keeping that in mind to kind of keep that that relationship. But some of the things that you had just mentioned, when working with parents who try to, try supplements or diets and things like that, I kind of always throw them back to a medical professional. So I think that thinking about what your scope is, what you just said about medication, like, I'm not a doctor, I don't know if you change his diet rapidly to removing all the things he's been eating, if this would be healthy, and maybe a nutritionist would be someone you could contact through your doctor. And I don't know if magnets on your brain are a good thing or a bad thing, and maybe a medical professional can help you with that. Like, those are the kinds of things I think could be added to that kind of conversation. However, saying those things could also get some pushback from mom. So it's kind of a delicate manner of, could do something like, I haven't heard of this, let me go research it and come back to you with more information about it, so that I have more information to have a more intelligent conversation about it. Like something like that could be a way to go also.
So you're looking to buy yourself some time and do just a
Exactly.
little bit of
Like, that's crazy,
research
don't
and
do
to come
that. And
before
just
you
like-
endorse one thing or the other. That would be very reasonable.
Yeah, and I think that speaking outside your scope, like, I'm not a nutritionist or a medical professional, so I don't know if those two things would be good or bad. So why don't we reach out to those people too and add them to the team, and then we can kind of have that discussion.
Yeah, that's probably a good strategy. Other things that you liked well or things that you would like to suggest could have been better? Gene, go ahead.
Well, I think Mark worked and spoke well and was concerned for the dignity and welfare of the family and the child, and that's a good thing. But
let me stop you there just for a second, Gene. What did Mark say that led you to that? You're inferring that, because what did Mark actually say?
I think when he spoke, when he gave the information medically or research based, and but was also willing to compromise if he could at that point.
Okay.
Because he wanted to continue the ABA therapy.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's probably the underlying current. If I was D, I would not have heard that. I mean, I might have heard it, but in some ways, what I thought Mark needed to say is, D, I am so impressed that you're concerned about the welfare of your child. I am too. We need to work together to do the very best we possibly can for this child. Now, because I think that you meant it, but I didn't hear it. And you always have to ask yourself, what did you actually say to this particular parent? And that's not disagreeing with you, but to say, let's make it real apparent that we're valuing the welfare of this child. That is the fundamental driving principle here. And I am so pleased that you want to be involved and be an advocate for your child. And let's work together to make it all happen. So that's where you put in that we framing, so it doesn't become you versus them, essentially. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was a good time for me to say that.
The only other thing I think about is if you have a very adamant parent, then I'm concerned about what kind of statements will be made later on. And if she says that, look at what this therapy, I thought this was on Jerry Springer, but I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it could have been.
I didn't think Dr. Phil, I thought it was Jerry Springer. But anyway, I was just thinking that I'd worry about convoluting what I'm doing with her saying that, publicly sometime that this is the outcome. And, they talk in here in 803 about statements by others. And if someone's making statements, that sound like this is what ABA is doing, then but when I've had adamant parents, whether it's in a outpatient counseling or anything else, I worry about whether I'm going to really want to continue with them because I don't know that they're going to ever listen to me, that they're
Right.
going to be, focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
So that raises a flag to me that, they're so adamant, I don't know what's going to be the outcome of this in the long run.
Mm-hmm. By the way, sometimes you can turn that adamant parent into an advocate for you, saying, boy, I would love to see if there's any research out there to suggest it works. Could you help me find that? And sometimes that's the greatest way to go, there's nothing out there. Oh my gosh. So it depends on, once again, what your read of the parent might happen to be. Now, let me go just a little bit further here. Okay, team, are you okay with Mark saying, sure enough, let's go ahead and keep ABA going, but add this on as an overlay?
I'm not.
Okay, why not? Why not? And how do you get to the stage where you're more comfortable? Tell me why not, first of all.
I guess I'm not convinced that she'll work with me.
Okay.
She'll be more interested if I'm doing that stuff.
Okay. Well, she might not want to work with you. I don't know that. But there's another sort of pernicious problem with it. Help me figure out what it is. I'm thinking of something. Well, you guys have taken a research methods course somewhere along the line. Yeah, what do you get? Yeah. Ah.
Is making a progress, and then if we're allowing the cap to happen, and the data, the kid is making progress, that's what gives, I guess, some of these therapies,
Mm-hmm.
is lending, like, it gives them supports, like, because all of a sudden the kid's making progress, it's likely the ABA that's making the progress, but the parent is like, oh yeah, it's the data.
Okay.
It's showing that this, look, how much more progress he's making now that he is going. So, like, that's what kind of gives these fake therapies.
Mm-hmm.
It's background or.
And that's the point I'm glad someone raised. I'll repeat it for those who can't hear that are on the live stream. The concern is when you now add in another therapy to an ongoing effective therapy, that how do you separate out that confound effect? It may be that they're still making very good progress under ABA. You've added this other thing in. And, if I'm the mother, if I'm Dee, I'm going, wow, look at the great progress my kid is making. Let me tell all my friends about magnet stockings and about no additive diets or whatever it may happen to be. And I'm attributing the benefits to that. Now, there are ways to get around that. I'm sure you looked enough at how do you make sure you have a stable baseline, or at least a predictable baseline. Here's what they're getting under ABA therapy. Now let's take a look at whether you get anything better when you add this in. Now, you've all of a sudden, by the way, turned yourself not just into a BCBA practitioner, but a little bit of a BCBA researcher, haven't you? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it does, then you should say, let me think about the alternative ethical issues that I need to think about. How do I make sure I have good sensitive measures? How do I make sure we have some consent right here to be involved in a research project? How do I think about the risks and benefits, that sort of thing? That might be okay. But the thing I'd be really concerned with is how do you separate out the ongoing effects of ABA from the additive effects or maybe detrimental effects of this other thing that's being added in? And I want to be looking at the data pretty frequently. So that would be another good thing to consider right there. Now, let me pose for you this one more question here. What if Dee had insisted that, I would like to terminate ABA therapy? Because sometimes parents come in saying, I want to try this out instead of ABA. Let me ask you guys, what do you think? Is that okay? Or let me ask you guys still have the microphones. Is that okay with anybody back here?
I think they have a right to terminate.
Mm-hmm. They always have the right. Right? Of course not, you can't. But now, does it add another interesting ethical obligation for you?
Yeah.
I think it does.
The moral imperative.
Yeah. And Mark is right. I think it adds almost a moral imperative. You're now doing what we would call an opportunity cost. You have an effective therapy, and now you're taking it away from this child in the interest of providing something that's untested, potentially ineffective, potentially harmful. We don't know that for sure. So it does raise an interesting ethical issue, and you may need to confront the parent about that. I would do it, once again, as tactfully as possible. Do you realize that Jeremiah or Mark or whoever you came up with is making good progress? You use Mark. That's his name, though, right? Yeah. Okay. Billy. Okay, Billy. Okay. You realize Billy is making good progress. Are you suggesting that we ought to terminate what's making good progress? Are you comfortable with doing that with your child?
And that's the first question I ask when these things come up.
Absolutely.
Will this interfere with the treatment that we found to be effective for Billy?
Right.
And he's making progress. What do you think about the progress he's made? And will this other stuff mean, will it edge out treatment or interrupt treatment to the detriment of the child?
Right, absolutely. So that's one of the things you need to consider along those lines. Now, it does also raise one more really difficult issue. Most of us are mandated reporters if we see child abuse and child neglect going on. Now, I don't think that this rises from what we talked about to the level that I would feel comfortable reporting it. But remember, a lot of times they say is suspicion of child abuse or child neglect. And if what you're saying is, now I'm going to take away an effective therapy right here, replace it with something, and you do a little research and you go, wait a minute, that's not too good for kids to do that kind of dietary restriction, then you may need to think along the lines of what does that raise then for you. I don't know that it raises that level for me right now, but think about this. If Billy was getting insulin for diabetes and Dee says, all right, let's just terminate that insulin and go to something else, I'd be going, oh, I don't know that I'm comfortable doing that. So when you're making ethical decisions, ask yourself for parallels. Would you feel comfortable terminating an effective medication in favor of something that's untested, even if it is on Dr. Phil or Jerry Springer or whoever it may happen to be? Yeah. So always think about the parallels as you're going along there, okay? And by the way, this sounded like it was a simple case, didn't it? It's not, nothing simple, okay? So you've got to think through all these issues. And notice the reason we're coming up with this is because we're talking to all these different people about what are these different perspectives. Let's see if there's anything else over here that you guys want to add in. Okay, let me take the microphones. I have not sampled opinions from over here. I like to hear suggestions for what went well, what could be better. You hold the microphone. We'd like to hear you too. Okay. Okay, yes.
Hello.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And I just wanted to add another point, similar point, in the sense that I would refer the mom to a nutritionist, because that would be beyond my area of expertise, So
Right.
I would say, have you consulted a nutritionist, just to make sure that, his nutrition is followed and he gets all the, benefits of his nutrition in the diet that he's going to receive, because I would feel more comfortable. Like doing a research is different than going to a nutritionist who is certified and knows what they're talking about, So that would be my go-to.
Okay, very good. Okay, so go to a nutritionist, get a little bit of consultation. Any other comments from other folks about things that you thought were especially good, or suggestions for improvement, or other concerns the way the whole thing laid out?
I think you did a very good job at, you never told the mother, you said no in a polite way, that I'm not qualified to do this treatment.
Mm-hmm.
I can't take the lead on this treatment. I'm not necessarily putting the cap on the child because I don't know if there's a certain sequence you do this, so you were really good at setting a really firm limit with what your professional boundaries and your personal comfort boundaries were, which I thought that was really great. And yeah, the only room for improvement, the only thing that, I think in the past I've done, and that what you can do is say, before we start any procedure, let's make sure that it's medically sound. Let's make sure there's no real risks to explore. And then if you're still really gung-ho after we've done our research, maybe we need to talk about how we set this up to see, is this effective? Is this more effective? Is it less effective? And, kind of come up with, your own little mini experiment. And then always finding a colleague in the field who might be able to assist you with that or guide you in a direction. I've done that too, like, wow, I'm going to consult with so-and-so who's really good at this or has some information.
Yep.
But other than that, it was a great job. And you're both excellent actors. So.
Yeah. Great job, yes, absolutely. Okay. Any other comments from this group over here? Grab a mic, yeah.
Just have one. So obviously the parent is interested in finding a solution, right? And I think it's a perfect opportunity. I think you guys did a great job on that. I think it's a perfect opportunity to teach skepticism, right? Like,
Good for you.
there's so many fads, right? So how do you become skeptical? You're trying to solve this. Let me teach you how to look at these studies. Let me teach you, how to evaluate this from a skeptical point of view.
Mm-hmm. And that was the one comment I was going to add in a little bit. And by the way, don't take this as critical, because Mark, you did a great job, but I'm always looking for ways to further improve on how we perform. When Dee's role was, you sound like you're a smart woman. Yeah, I know you're a smart woman, okay, Dee? You played a role where you sound like you're a smart woman. So Mark's comment about CDC approved, evidence-based stuff, that probably made sense to you, but for most parents, they're going to hear that and go, was that NBA, NFL, what is, and why in the hell would you not believe what you saw on Dr. Phil? So you may need to think along the lines of how do you frame this in a way that's maximally understandable for people. And I tend not to do, when I'm talking with parents, not to do evidence-based treatment, at least initially. I say, we have some research out there that shows what works. And I feel some obligation to make sure you understand what works and what has been untested. And she goes, but I saw it on TV. And I go, well, do you believe everything you see on TV? Game of Thrones, is that real? Come on. Dr. Phil, remember, is someone offering to sell you this magnet cap? Do you think they might have a vested financial interest in making it sound like it works? So I'm not saying that it doesn't work. I'm saying that part of what you want to do here is teach parents a little bit about skeptical thinking. And a little bit, by the way, if you've never seen it, Carl Sagan has this wonderful thing out. Carl Sagan was an astronomer, okay, called the baloney detector. He talks about, ways in which you evaluate claims as to whether they're efficacious or not efficacious. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And if someone has a vested interest in you believing in something, you ought to be a little more skeptical because they're making money off of you. So those are some of the things you might want to think about, how you frame that in a way that is understandable for most parents, okay? So anyhow, lots of stuff right there to think about and talk about as we go along. And if you haven't had this happen already, you will sometime or another have a parent come to you saying, let's try this out, and take some of the lessons you learn here with great examples and even better critique in some ways, and say, how do I begin to build that into how I talk with parents? Okay? Anything else on this one? Because I'm going to have us move on. Are you guys doing okay? Do you need a 5? Do you want to say something else?
I just have something
yes,
really quick.
please,
I was
Angela.
in a similar situation to this, and it was helpful for me to go over the data with the parent. So often you're you're reviewing data and graphs, but they're in the space where they're seeing what's happening right now. And if you can go back to the beginning and kind of show them the progress that they've made, often you forget how far you've come. And that was really powerful for a parent that I worked with. So
great.
Just one thing to add.
Yeah, and I do think that if you train parents to begin looking at the data, things that you look at, that's not a bad idea. Don't expect them to be sophisticated. Say, when it goes up, that's really good.
Yeah, this was a very easy,
make it easy to understand.
Literally, you can draw a graph right there with them and show them.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, by the way, Team 2. Fantastic job. Do we need a short break? I emphasize short because I don't want everybody to go away for very long. Do we need a short break, or are we ready to go on with Team 1 and 3? Okay, how about a 3-minute break, okay? A short break. Well, 5 minutes, okay? I don't know where the restrooms are, okay? But I do want to get people back in time. We get Team 1 and Team 3 to do their role plays, okay? Okay, we've got most people back. We're going to wait just another minute or two. We'll get some more people back, okay? Well, you do you orchestrate yourself wherever you want to, but remember that people are actually watching on video up there. So part of your job is if you want to sit here or you want to sit over there, however you want to do it, it's up to you. Okay? But I will ask you to tell us who has what role.
All right.
Okay? Okay. Hang on, we're just getting 3 more people back in. Okay. People on the live stream, this is team number 1. This is Lisa and Angela. And this is the case they have selected right here. I heard some of their discussion. It was an interesting discussion, so this will also generate lots and lots of good discussion. before you get started, let me ask the whole team, what are the underlying ethical principles that are of concern in this particular case? Okay. They'll have some numbers, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys to kind of do a demonstration of how you're going to deal with it. Yes, hop right in. And hold on.
So, some of the codes that are probably, are violated are 2.11, that's records and data, 2.08, which is disclosure, 2.07 is maintaining records, and 4.10, which is avoiding harmful reinforcers. And those are in context to the guns and, what is it, danger? Guns and, the porn that.
Okay. So
One, 2, 3, 4.
you identified a lot of ethical issues involved right here, okay?
Yeah.
And I realize that now, I just did not have my mic on, so we're turning this over to team number 1, and they had selected this particular role play, and we've identified some of the ethical principles underlying things as a result of your discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Angela to kind of demonstrate the role play, okay? You guys are on.
All right, so Lisa is playing Pat, and I am myself, Angela, the other BCBA.
And this is Nick's case file. Hi, Angela. You'll never guess whose house I just came from.
Hey, Pat, who were you out seeing?
I saw Nick, your old client, and oh my gosh, is he doing so well, so much better than he's ever been. Hey, I have to leave this here. I have to run to the ladies. I'll be right back. Oh, wow, what a day. I'll tell you, it's so nice to see a kid like Nick who was making no progress all of a sudden. He's just shooting up. His graphs are textbook.
Wow, that's really great to hear. I know I had a lot of trouble identifying effective reinforcers for Nick.
Well, that's what it's all about, and that's what I'm good at, finding those effective reinforcers.
Pat, there's something that I want to talk to you about, about those reinforcers. I took a look at Nick's file, and I saw that you're using porn and guns as reinforcers.
Well, first of all, why would you be opening his file? You're not allowed to. He's no longer your case. I thought we share an office. I should have locked it in my desk, but you can't just go open my stuff.
Well, we do work at the same agency. I thought it would be okay. I do know most of the information anyway.
Well, anyway, so what's the big deal? He's a 14-year-old boy. We live here in Central PA. Half of the houses I know have guns. I go to the firing range every Saturday. And 14-year-old boys love porn. So I'm just using things in his natural environment that he's already using. We just put some contingencies on it.
Well, I know that you know that we're both mandated reporters, and unfortunately, we aren't able to provide children with access to porn, especially at Nick's age. That's something that we have to report.
Are you kidding? I didn't know that. I've been through the trainings. Remember, we just went to one last week. I don't even remember something about kids being able to use porn.
Yeah, it's in there. So that's something that we're going to have to sit down and do.
Okay, well, that one I can definitely talk to the parents. I completely thought it was okay. The parents were on board with it. I hadn't even considered the child abuse law, but you're right. That's probably something we should talk about removing from the treatment plan.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about how you're using the gun range as a reinforcer.
Well, as you know, Nick's dad is a gun instructor, and he does run classes on Saturday mornings, and Nick loves to go. So what we've decided to do is if he has so many good days in a row, and he's kind of doing a little self-management, he's pretty high functioning, he's able to earn time or the ability to go with his dad and assist at the gun range. So it's not like out in the backyard. But it's something he really enjoys to do. It's something the family was doing before. We just thought that we would add it as an incentive as opposed to just a given.
Okay. So have you done any, assessments to confirm that, Nick, maybe not assessments, but, reviewed his file, making sure that he's not aggressive with with other people, that he knows that all the safety around guns, and he has the capacity and he can understand the danger?
Honestly, that's a good question, Angela. I just kind of assumed, since his dad was a gun instructor, that he had all this information, but that's probably something maybe I should sit down and talk to the family about. End show.
You guys are great. That's not an easy one, is it? Well done. So my compliments. Hold on to that just for a second, okay? You saw what they did here. Now your job is to give them a grade, okay? So collectively, take a quick look with your team and ask yourself A, B, C, D, E, and I'll once again come by and say, give me your justification, and also give me any ways you could have improved. So you guys do your grade. Because remember, you have to evaluate yourself. You aren't off the hook altogether. As a matter of fact, give it to the rest of your teams, because you guys are on stage here a lot. Yes. You guys come up with a grade over here? Okay. You guys have a grade over here? Okay, you guys have a grade over here. Okay. Everybody ready? Show me the grades. A, self-evaluation, A, team 3, and from over here? It's interesting. You have a little social pressure going on this team. We're working on it. Okay. Okay, good. I want to hear the minority also in just a second, okay? So let's come over here. What went well, and what do you think could have been improved? Let me ask, from your perspective, let me ask our primary actors and actresses, first of all. Actresses. What did you think? What did you feel good about?
Well, I think we were trying to highlight, there were several issues that went on, and the first was,
Ooh,
and I think because I used to manage an outpatient clinic, was leaving records around. People do this, and people will be like, oh, I just saw your client, and da-da-da, and get into a conversation, which is really not appropriate. If you're no longer actively engaged in a case, you really don't have the right to that information anymore. But the other is, just trying to think of family cultures, and, are you living in an area where people do have guns and hunt and use them regularly, or are you in a different environment where there's a different kind of societal view of gun use,
Right.
and then the gun safety, and then honestly, until our colleague here looked up the regulations on the use of pornography, we were kind of surprised. I mean, not that we've added it to treatment plans, but the whole issue of an adult saying, hey, go ahead, you can look at porn.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting perspective. I did not know it was technically in the child abuse and child neglect law, so thank you for looking that up. So, but most people probably don't know that. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting is that you were not real defensive. You said, oh, I didn't realize that when you pointed it out. So I think that in some ways you illustrated very good, here's feedback, and you were tactful about the feedback. You sound like you were saying, I have to report her. I'm sorry, I have to report you. Yeah. So I think that was good. Any other things you thought from the other team members that you wanted to comment on? Anything you thought could have been better?
No, I think they did well. I mean, they were clear about what was going on, and they were very clear about what was going on and what were the difficulties, and laid out all the code violations that were done. I felt like they covered all the stuff that we discussed. So.
And sufficiently tactful?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest part, right? Like, this is so uncomfortable, right? Talking about, like, porn and guns, right? They're very, like, deep issues.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Very political issues, right? So to not become defensive, I thought was great, right? That went better than I thought it was going to go. Because it's so easy to go, don't touch my guns, or, that kind of thing. It always, just escalates into terrible things. But that was handled really well, I thought.
Right.
It's a great example of taking feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, let's figure this out.
Okay.
I think the only thing that could have maybe went more in depth is when Pat was talking about the client records, because Angela was like, "Oh, I thought we were at the same company," and that was okay. And then I think Pat just kind of let it go and didn't say why that could still be an issue with the confidentiality and how it could. So I think that maybe a little bit more in depth in that conversation, because I feel like then it kind of just went away from that conversation. Like it could have maybe came back to it or something.
And I'm glad you guys picked up on that, because I put that in there on purpose for people to have to wrestle with the issue of, is it okay to go peeking into this file that is not your client? I probably would have asked more detail myself about, can I look at this, what are you using, blah, 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 as opposed to peeking into the file. But now here's the question I guess that I'll pose for everybody. Many agencies have confidentiality clauses that say, this information is confidential to be within this agency. Me, my supervisors, other colleagues on a need-to-know basis within the confines of this agency. Now, that does not necessarily give you permission to go peeking in, but it does suggest, and by the way, if you don't do this already, I really suggest that agencies have periodic case reports and clinical reviews where they say, here's my case, here's what's going on, and everybody gets to hear what's going on, assuming that once again it falls within confidentiality clauses. There's a lot to be said for having peer review and good ideas and stuff like that, assuming you can do it non-defensively and without attacking people. So that would have been a really cool thing to say, boy, I would love for you to consider doing a case presentation on this. I'd like to hear what's going on. That's so cool. Okay, so that would be pretty good. By the way, do a lot of your agencies have clauses, confidentiality clauses, that are that inclusive? Yeah. Most places, if you're going to go outside of your agency, you got to get special permission, but inside your agency on a need-to-know basis, especially for supervisors and stuff, it's perfectly fine. Yep.
Yeah, I think we talked a bit about this. So we're able to talk about cases in supervision or case collaboration type setting, but in terms of access to files, especially with electronic records, usually your caseload is what you have if you are following the rules.
Right.
If your security matrix is set up within your system the right way, you're typically only have access to your people.
Correct.
So.
Yep. So that would be a complication, absolutely. Right about that, okay? Let me grab microphones and let's see other opinions in here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. How about you guys? You gave them an A. Tell me what you liked. And tell me what you think could have been better. You want to?
I guess I
Come on.
When I first read that one, it sounded a little bit scary to be working with that person. And I thought maybe that would be a situation where before I confronted them, maybe I would go talk to a colleague so I had someone with me too, and maybe just, admit, like, I know I shouldn't have looked in this file, but I did, and, take, the responsibility for making that ethical violation. Like, I shouldn't have done that, but now I know this, and I need some help approaching this person, because I thought she took her critique of that and took it really well, and I'm not sure. There could have been a completely different reaction that you could have acted out.
Yeah, you could have said, I'm going to file a complaint against you for
Right,
violating my client confidentiality.
Right,
Yes.
so it would be nice to have someone to back you up that you did approach it with such tact and that you didn't name call or do anything like that, because it could have got really ugly. So I just thought that might be one where you would go get a supervisor, because that's just sounded, like you'd want someone to know that you were calling on a colleague.
Okay, good point. Other commentary about things that you thought was especially good or things that could have been improved? Yes. You may have to turn it on. Push.
Hello? This one's better. I have the dead one. I think the conversation about the gun aspect and the gun range was a good one, because it just came to light. I don't know if it's appropriate still, but it came to light in he's the instructor at the school, and it's something that he wants his son to go to, and he might be there not necessarily to be shooting guns. Maybe he is, but maybe he's just there to help his dad with the class or see what he does. That conversation about that made it seem maybe it is more appropriate. So that was kind of, you need more information before you go run to somebody and say, oh my God, she's taking the kid to shoot guns. It could be that he's taking his son to work. And then I like the follow-up of, like, do you know if he has a safety awareness to be there? It's a follow-up, but I thought that conversation was good to not just jump to conclusions. And that's why we sometimes need that more information, and that conversation is always a good piece. to know if it is a violation or not.
Yep, I thought that was real good. Always ask questions and ask questions about giving further clarification. That was marvelous. You guys did very well with that. Anything else here? Yeah.
Well, I just think that you can't look at a file, and I think that opens you up right away to a penalty because HIPAA, you just can't do that. And if somebody said, I think it was the discussion and the way they talked about everything was very, very well, and they clarified and worked all that out. But if if a person said, this client is doing well, then I'd just ask, what are you doing? And you can't go and look in a file, because if you tell a person you looked in a file, then you've already you lost it. You just can't do that. But I would find out what the person's doing, and as you folks were mentioning, if you bring it up in a case discussion sometime, that's much better. But even if you did look in the file, you still can't. You have to find another way to bring it up, because if you say you looked in the file, I think you violated too much, and you're in danger.
And that's actually a good point. I'm glad someone focused on the file. Angela looked in the file, and we might have been tempted to say, I can't say anything. But boy, sometimes we have these ethical things where they're in conflict with each other. So I shouldn't have looked in the file. Can I say anything? Do I feel more of an ethical compulsion to say, I'm concerned about what you're using as reinforcers? So sometimes I always find myself, when I have these conflicting ethical obligations, going, okay, what could happen if I went this direction versus that direction? If I admitted I looked in a file, then maybe I get in trouble with HIPAA. If I don't say anything about the guns and this kid has a history of aggression and he goes and shoots people, then I go, wait a minute, I don't want to find myself party of that, much less so than HIPAA. Once again, there's ways to navigate all of that, but I sometimes find myself thinking, gosh, what is the worst possible outcome that could happen, and how do I make sure that doesn't happen? And by the way, just in case anybody is curious, I named this kid Nick on purpose. I told these folks why I named him Nick, because the Parkland shooter was Nicholas Cruz, and one of the things that was happening is he was getting guns as a reinforcer. Okay? Now, there's plenty of evidence that he was dangerous, and I didn't put that in this particular situation, but you may always take a step back and go, wait a minute, what is the downside of providing a potentially dangerous reinforcer, such as a gun? I'm not sure that I would say porn is necessarily dangerous, but it is worth thinking about. We had a kind of a funny conversation over here. We were talking about, porn for a 14-year-old, and I said, I was 14 once, and I used to be really excited when the National Geographic came, and there was pictures of naked women in Africa. And I was going, wow, this is so cool. And then someone was saying, oh, I used to look forward to the Victoria's Secret catalog coming. Well, I don't know if that necessarily qualifies as porn, because there's some really awful stuff out there, and there's some stuff that may be more or less innocuous, depending on what, once again, your approach is. So it is worth, you might even have to ask, well, what do you mean by porn? Let me get a better idea about that sort of thing. So,
So I guess, if you look at porn or guns, and I know it's a sensitive topic and I don't want to, but if you compare them to, I guess, gun will kill people, if he's not able to understand the safety or
right.
not able to follow the gun laws or rules or safety rules, then it can get more deadly kind of. So.
Yeah, and I agree with you in terms of relative bad effect, though I want to also acknowledge, though, that there's, for people that have very compromised judgment, that sometimes some of the fantasy stuff that's out there, be it porn or be it video games or be it wrestling. There was a kid in Florida on the autism spectrum that was arrested because he was reenacting some stuff he saw on championship wrestling with his 3-year-old kid, slammed them to the ground and smothered them. And he was going, I didn't realize I could do that, because I saw those people on television doing that, So I don't want to make you too sensitive to that sort of thing, but I do want you to think about, where do you draw the line about reinforcers, and how do you hopefully make sure that if he's using guns, they're stored safely at home, and he knows how to use them safely. Some of those things I would be very tempted to be concerned with. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a kind of a sub-comment about relative dangers. What we perceive as a relative danger may in fact not be a relative danger. Guns, yes, directly can kill you. Knives, yes, directly can kill you. Porn, however, as a relative danger to a gun, it's not immediately lethal, but the trajectory of that use of that media is extremely deadly in a person's life. And it is not only, it is encompassing as a life-destroying addiction. And that's for somebody that's mentally healthy at the beginning.
Right.
First exposure to porn used to be somewhere in early to mid-teen years. First exposure to porn now is below 10 years old.
Really?
Nationally. The industry has gone from being a millions of dollars a year industry when it was limited because there was no internet. Now it is a worldwide industry in the tens of billions, heading to hundreds of billions and upward, that destroys lives through human trafficking and other things. So I don't want it to be devalued in terms of it's a relative. No, this thing will just as effectively kill a person, just not as immediately.
And that is a good comment. I like to hear alternative perspectives, and that is a good alternative perspective. And we really need more research about porn, the trajectory, how is it possible to use it safely. My sense is probably everybody in here has seen porn at some time in their life. So the question is one of how do some people do it and not have it destroy their lives, and some people destroy their lives. So that would be a good point, yes.
There is one thing that's being ignored in the case history.
Yes.
And that is, Nick is a 14-year-old autistic kid.
Right.
What do we know about kids with autism? Highly impulsive, poor social judgment, not non-compliant, and whenever a reinforcer or anything that we're introducing, what's the worst thing that can happen? So with Nick, he can be overstimulated, become obsessed with it, and start acting out in school and other things. And I think the person that had violated HIPAA but now is in a bind, can I find out another way that I can have found out about this without admitting that I did a violation and still abide by the moral imperative to not let something happen? And the approach I would have taken with the co-worker beside, are you effing out of your mind, would have been, what's the worst thing that can happen with an autistic kid with porn and guns? And what's the downside? He could start acting out in school. When people ask, where did you find out about that? Oh, my therapist.
Here, try that one.
My therapist uses porn as a reinforcer, and he's going around goosing girls and acting out inappropriately because he's overstimulated. And with guns, there are millions of rules. We're constantly, Nick is a 14-year-old autistic kid, and not to stigmatize the condition, but what do we confront with children on the spectrum? Non-compliance, not abiding by rules, acting impulsively, not aware of consequences, which is all of the things that we're trying to provide, and putting them around something dangerous when you have that etiology and topography of the disability seems like asking for trouble. What if he doesn't follow the rules? What if he, and we know kids that, even little ones, parents have locks on everything and they get in there and are getting treats and other things. If that happens around guns, you know, the consequences could be very serious, not only for the child and the public, but who put that in a treatment plan? You know, the question that I often am faced with, you know, if we're allowing a kid to use a trampoline or something that they might get hurt with, is hearing the plaintiff attorney saying, Mr. Listokin, exactly where were you when little Billy did a double flip and broke his neck and is now a quadriplegic? But you thought he was able to do that stuff. exactly where were you with the child? Were you spotting him? And the answer might not be satisfactory to the jury.
Let me grab that because I need to move us on. I think that, first of all, the discussion was great, brought up a lot of issues that I had not thought about, and thank you guys for doing that. That's a tough role play, quite honestly, but it puts together all these different things, by the way, and I'm hoping you never get faced with this type of issue, but it is worth thinking carefully about what reinforcers do you choose, do they have any downside associated with them, and if those are the only reinforcers you can find that are effective, is there a way to manage that risk? And I hear what Mark is saying, that, you got to be thinking very carefully along these lines. But remember, some of these kids are going to age out, and the question is, can you teach them to manage their behavior within limits that would allow them to take all these temptations they're going to get faced with, Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it may happen to be, and manage those effectively. Dunkin' Donuts, by the way, I'm not equating with porn or with guns. I'm simply saying maybe it's just about as dangerous. I don't know from what I've seen in New England. But I am saying that you may have to think about, well, is there a way to prepare kids to deal with and manage some of these reinforcers that are out there in the real world, especially if they're going to assume adult roles? Okay, great commentary, good discussion. We have one more group to go, okay? So you guys come on up here, okay?
Real quick, I just want to make a point. The two colleagues talking it out, there could be a different scenario where, the one who peeked in to the file could have reached her supervisor.
Right.
And that could have led to another whole scenario of, what could have happened So I'm just curious about what the supervisor would have said or how that person would have addressed the situation and all that kind of stuff.
And that's another way that one could have rolled out, obviously. Rather than doing a direct confrontation, you can say, I need to go talk to the supervisor. I'll be back in a few minutes. And right, absolutely. Good observation. Okay, here is team number 3. And just to remind everybody, if I can pull it up here. Well, actually, remind us, this is the agency that's understaffed, and you're getting all your BCBAs given far too many assignments. That's what the scenario is, okay? So someone be the director and tell us who has what role.
I'm in the director's role. These are the BCBAs there. In the first scenario, I think they're going to be discussing what's going on with the new person, and then I think they're going to come and speak to the director. Is that okay?
Correct. I'm the new person.
This is the new person.
Can you believe they want to give us more cases? How do you guys handle this? I mean, you guys have been here forever. I don't know how I'm supposed to use this. Cut corners? What am I supposed to do? Is that ethical?
No, you have to take it home. You just have to do it all at home. I work 3 hours a night. You work till 7 every night. Tell them.
I work till 7 every night.
Well, is there a better way for me to be more efficient? Just then works that we don't get paid for that. And then he says, well, this is all about, this is how you get paid, and we have to have all these cases. And I don't have physically enough time in my day to do all the hours he wants me to do. I don't, how do you cut corners?
You know what, we don't. You're right. We should all do something. It's ridiculous how much we're being asked to do.
Is there a union that would represent us?
No. I think maybe if we went and talked to the supervisor, we can figure out a way to try to make this work. How do we do that? You guys are the experts because you've been here so long.
We should probably go and have a meeting, and we should bring up our ethics and how we have to follow a code of ethics as BCBAs, and we need to make sure that we are meeting those codes that you found earlier when we were discussing it.
Yes, 2.09.
Because, and we also need to have a code of ethics with each other. Code something in here between colleagues. Yeah.
Meet with him, or do you want us to cut it here?
No, I want to hear the meeting. I want to hear the meeting with the supervisor, okay? What do you say?
Hi, what are you all doing here? You should be out working with the kids.
Gene, we have some concerns about the amount of cases that we're taking and how we're supposed to ethically meet all of the hours and meet the client's needs with overloading ourselves with cases that it seems like it's too much for each of us to handle. And we're not sure how we can come together as a solution. How can we kind of work this out? I know I'm new, so there may be things that I'm taking more time to do, so maybe there are some ways to make me more efficient since I'm new to the field, but we kind of as a group want to discuss ways we can.
Well, everyone else seems to be managing the other kids. I haven't heard them say anything about it. We've given them some extra cases, and they seem to be doing it. I mean, some of the reporting is a little late, but you know, we can manage that. We're trying to hire someone. I don't have anyone helping me to hire these people. So you need to take on, you know, some other case. In fact, I have 2 other cases for you people. Since you're here, you need to think about this. And you know, we have to have so many people, so many cases, in order to afford paying for someone else, right?
Absolutely. We want to make a lot of money just like you. But maybe what we could do is we could keep track of our caseloads and our hours we're working, and then we can meet back again next week, and we can keep meeting every week so you can update us on how the hiring is going.
Well, it's hard to find people. Is there anything you can, I mean, I'm under a lot of pressure to hire people. What ethically is a problem that you're facing?
That we can't accurately give to read it from here. We're responsible for giving them the amount of hours and the amount of service that we're recommending that they need, say 4 hours for Joey and 6 hours for Susie, but you're giving me 47 hours in a week that I can't physically do. So I think it's that we're not able to focus, and I don't know if there's a guideline for the amount of what's reasonable caseload for a BCBA, but I'm surely don't think it's 100.
So are you all facing this problem?
Yes.
Well, if you can help me find someone to take on these cases, that would be a big help.
Gene, I'm thinking that while you're looking for somebody else, maybe we should be sending some of these referrals to our sister agency across town.
Well, but then we're going to lose the business, aren't we? I mean, it's difficult. I mean, can't you modify some of the things you do? Can't you make just cut some ends, you know?
I think if we lose the quality of service, we're going to lose the business, and I think that's the greater picture to see. I think that's what I'm concerned about, is protecting the quality of what we do. I think we should probably end scene there.
Okay.
Do you want to add something?
Oh, why can't we just take a look at how long it takes us typically to do one of the evaluations or treatment plans, and then take a look at the profit that you're making from it, and see what we can do to determine a caseload that allows for profit but also for quality provision of services?
Well, maybe we can. It's difficult to be here doing this by myself. I don't really, you know, you're the professionals. I'm the administrator. So maybe we need to do that. I could use the help, really.
Okay, great. We'll stop it right there. That's kind of a real scenario, isn't it? For a lot of people, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's often like we have to have a whole caseload worth of cases to get the other person. So
Right.
you guys have to share that, and then when you show that we have these 16 kids, then we can get somebody to fill it.
Okay, great.
Let's speak up.
Okay, you know the routine. We need to give you guys a grade. You can stay here if you'd rather, or else you can go back there and give yourself a grade, either one you want to do. But you got about a minute or so. We only have about 10 minutes of discussion time left. So let's find a grade and let's talk about what went well and what we think might have been even better. Okay? And don't forget, Team 3, you got to grade yourself. Thank you, sir.
Positive reinforcement.
You know, a B- for showbiz.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys got a grade picked out? You guys have a grade? Okay. You guys come up with a grade over here? Perfect. Okay. Show me the grades, okay? An A, B. What'd you come up with over here? An A and an A. I'm glad someone finally gave something other than an A, okay? Not that we didn't see good performances, but there's a lot of room for improvement even with good performances, okay? So, let me start with you guys. What did you think went well, and what do you think the BCBAs could have done more effectively to nudge Gene in the right direction?
I think it does remind us that there's often the disconnect. I think it does remind us there's often a big disconnect between administrators and professional
Absolutely.
BCBAs. You know, they don't really know sometimes what they're doing, what the other one is doing.
You're absolutely right. They don't understand the pressures on the other person and what their obligations are. That is certainly a possibility. And this is a good place to open that discussion. Absolutely. Other commentary, things you did well or things you could have done better?
Maybe needed a little more preparation on our vision, what we thought would be good. But I think what was tricky is this is a real world situation. This happens all the time. And how do you say no? And it's not necessarily ethical for me to say, well, this is too much work, I'm leaving, and then drop all my clients. But it's not necessarily ethical for me to take on more than I can handle. But then if I'm being told, take it, you need it, like you have to do it, what's the answer? So I think that's difficult to have a comeback for. But I think that, like, let's see how long it takes us to do something, or compare how long it takes us to do something and see if there's ways to cut it down was kind of a good way to go. And a team approach, I don't know if that was good or bad. I think a team approach of how can we help and figure out what to do to make it better was a good approach. But the supervisor just kept saying, well, I need somebody, I need help with that. But he wasn't necessarily seeing that we could look at something different. It took us a while to get around to that.
Yeah. Did you want to also confront Gene about, I need help? I mean, in some ways, that's Gene's job as an administrator, isn't it? Well, actually, to find personnel. Yeah. So it'd have been real tempting to say, gosh, we're sympathetic right here, but, you know, tell us how we can help without compromising my work already, because I'm busy, busy, busy. And by the way, I thought one thing you guys did was really good is you ask each other how you're doing. And, you know, I've seen situations where it is even much worse. I've seen situations where Elise says, I work till 7 o'clock every night and I haven't seen my kids and had been time to play with them at all. So it's compromising the quality of my life, my family life. And you said, you know, I can't sleep at night because I'm worried about this sort of stuff. I'm working every night. So you do recognize that you're going to get burnout, and you're going to, if you can say to Gene, I think I have this on still, you can say to Gene, you know, part of your job is not only to recruit, but also to retain good BCBAs. And if you burn us out by overloading us, then you're going to have a compounded problem more than just finding another BCBA. So that's another strategy you might want to adopt there. That doesn't necessarily mean that Gene doesn't need help. He may need some advice from you guys as to where to go about and recruit and how to make this the most attractive agency possible for a new BCBA to come into. So that would be another interesting way to frame it, actually. You guys had a BA? No, you had an A. Well, tell me what you liked and what you could improve upon. Who wants to go? I'm zipping you guys along here, so we'll have a few minutes here.
Right, I thought the group discussion was fantastic. I think, like, going collaboratively, right, because you got to know. And I think it's very hard starting at a new agency, right, because you have to be willing to know your own limits, right? Like, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing. If I can't provide treatment, right, then this isn't the company for me, right? If I can't do it, I have to have the integrity to walk away.
Right.
Right. Or, or else what am I doing? So, yeah, I thought that was an interesting balance. I thought trying to get everybody together was a great way to do it.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
I was going to say, as behavior analysts, we're always so concerned about the data, but it seems like when you look for a caseload, it's based upon productivity for the staff person in meeting their benefits and their hourly wage. And I think it would be interesting as a profession or as professionals to state, so what does the research indicate would be a healthy caseload? How many hours can you conceivably do in a week, in a 40-hour week. I don't even know if anyone's done research on this in our field. I know in other fields, there's definitely where unions are involved. I was saying with social workers, they actually, there was a union that mandated that, and I worked in the county of Alameda. There was a caseload cap that was based on your ability to be productive and effective and efficient. So I think, an approach that you can take is to ask, we're so worried about the data and the research. What does the research and the data indicate about an appropriate caseload, not my bottom line as an employer and a profit margin, but as effective work?
Mm-hmm. That'd be a good approach to take, actually. Other comments from you guys? Yeah.
Also, I guess, like, discussing amongst your colleagues, trying to, if you are new to an agency, like,
Right.
just trying to find out, like, how do you manage your time, or like, what do you do, like, how many hours of observation are you doing, or data analysis, or is there a breakup of, like, if I was doing an FBA, like, how many hours do I need to delegate to certain things, like, data analysis or stuff like that. And if there's a guideline to try to find out, like, on many occasions, like, just managing your time and not overdoing stuff, that helps kind of. But, and also, like, I think, like, that's my problem, but also, like, saying that, I've reached my limit, and, like, I don't think I can, like, saying that politely to your supervisor, making sure that he or she understands, that kind of can help, like, just being honest with, in that work relationship.
Yeah, and I thought one of you guys said something I thought was absolutely critical and pivotal in there. Something about, don't we want to be known for quality service? Who said that? Thank you for saying that. I think that that's the sort of thing that will really make a difference to an administrator. I know you're interested in maximizing profits and cash flow and revenue and stuff like that, but the way to do it, the way to have people want to come to us, is if we can offer quality services. And there's a breaking point. At the point beyond which we go, we're going to start compromising quality. And once you've damaged the agency's reputation, it is really hard to reestablish it. So that might give you some interesting, and what you're doing, you're saying, let me look from Gene's perspective, the agency director, about what is he thinking about in terms of the business model, that sort of thing. So that I thought was a really good move that you did. Okay, let me see if there's any comments from over here, unless you guys have anything else you want to say over here. Okay, last set of comments here. Anything you'd like to comment on? Good, bad, in between, improvements? You may have, you do. You have two mics, actually. Yes.
I thought they did a good job in showing how complicated the issue is. I mean, I saw their frustration in trying to deliver quality services, but I also saw the supervisor or the administrator's frustration of not being able to hire another BCBA because
Right.
they're so hard to find.
Right.
So I thought they did a really good job showing that and the helplessness that
Right.
they felt, they both felt.
Sure.
And they were willing to work it out, but everybody sort of didn't know what to do.
Mhm.
And that's a very real issue right now.
It is, absolutely. Good perspective. Any other commentary, things that you liked or things that could be improved?
Just a comment. My other field is speech language pathology, and short staffing is a big issue. And one of the approaches that our association has taken is getting away from a pure caseload approach toward a workload approach. Like you were saying, considering how long it takes to do an assessment, how long it takes to work with a child with more significant needs, it's going to require more planning. So rather than just thinking pure numbers, sometimes that's helpful in advocating for your needs, looking at more the nature rather than just the numbers.
Right. And actually, the BACB does have some guidelines out there about caseloads, especially if you have complicated cases, a little bit lower load, easy cases, a little higher load. So there are some guidelines out there that the BACB has provided. But you're really right. It does take a careful look at what is the workload associated with the case, actually.
Yeah, and it's a tough sell, but we're trying to do more of that in the schools because it historically was just caseload and not considering all the hours. So in an agency, that might be an advocacy point.
Yeah. Other comments from folks? Okay. Let me make one other comment about that particular case, and that is, somebody asked the other, you asked the other BCBAs, how are you doing this? And you know, sometimes that reveals that people are doing things that are unethical. I'm cutting and pasting, I'm making up data, and they could be doing any number of things like that. And first of all, I wouldn't know that people would come forward with that sort of thing unless you provided them some cover, so to speak. But the other thing is, you might want to say to your agency director, you know, it presents a challenge for us when our agency policies are tempting us to do things that might be low quality service or potentially unethical. And we'd really like to work at an agency and be able to recruit our friends into an agency that would be supportive of ethical delivery of services and high quality delivery of services. So once again, that would be another way of framing things a little bit to emphasize the benefit to the agency director. Now, of course, the agency director is absolutely right saying, I got to look at the bottom line and I have to make sure that we're productive in generating revenue goals and stuff like that. So that may be where you need to think along the lines of how do we be as efficient as possible. But anyhow, a real case scenario, and you guys did a great job handling it. My compliments, okay? I'm looking at our time. It's about 2 minutes till 12 o'clock. Let me end with just a couple of quick comments, and thank you. I'll show you in a second. One of the comments is, take a look at what happened in these team activities. Notice, remember, we talked about it isn't just memorizing the BCBA code. It's trying to identify what are the ethical issues, what are the options. Discuss with your colleagues and get feedback on which of the options are the best ways to do it. Rehearse and get a little bit of feedback about how you tactfully do something. So this sort of a scenario, team-driven, interactive thing where you have to also evaluate your performance and evaluate other people's performance. Now, I didn't, by the way, I didn't do the thing that sometimes is most challenging. I didn't say, you come up here and show me how you do it. You show me how you do it. But the reality is, as you're sitting there, you need to be thinking about how would I do it if I was in that scenario. That will make you so much more effective and comfortable, because if people, unless they develop some fluency, they have a hard time dealing with the ethical issues, even if they know the ethics code. So think along the lines of replicating and continuing this type of activity in whatever your agency is. And I would also like to end by simply saying, you guys were wonderful, a fantastic collaborative and participatory audience. Thank you very much. Talk to you later. If you would do me the favor of bringing some of the materials back up here, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you very much.